Welcome, everyone, to another edition of SCRC's Let's Talk Caregiving. I'm your host, Roberto Velasquez, President and CEO of SCRC, and I'm here as always with my co host, Marta Rañón, our Executive Vice President.
Hey, Roberto.
Hey, Marta. Today, we have a very special guest, a very good friend of mine, Dr. Dolores Gallagher Thompson. Dolores is certified in geropsychology by the American Board of Professional Psychology. She is a professor of research for the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at Stanford University School of Medicine. She is a renowned researcher in caregiving and now a family caregiver herself. Welcome, Dolores.
Thank you, Roberto. I'm very glad to be here and have this opportunity to share some of my experiences.
We appreciate that very much, Dolores. We're so thrilled to have you join us here today. We want to talk again about caregiving and caregivers, but from a spouse's perspective. And I know you are now a caregiver for your spouse. It brings different new challenges to, caregiving is very challenging, as we know. It's all consuming. Family caregivers are the invisible helpers, often giving up everything, their jobs, retirements, even their own health. It's almost like self-neglect also from caregiving perspective is a prerequisite to being a caregiver. I say that jokingly, but the truth is that it often creates even more challenges for the family caregiver as well.
I am so glad that Dr. Dolores Gallagher Thompson is here today because I know in all of the other conversations that we've had, Roberto, we've talked about caregiving from a different perspective, right? From the perspective of caring for a relative, maybe a parent or a grandparent. But having you here, Dolores, with your experience as a caregiver is really important for those listeners out there because we also need to understand that there is a new role that this specific spouse is now in. It's almost like it kind of goes away as a spouse, as a partner, and you become a nurse. You become, more attentive with all of the different requirements that this new role is becoming apparent with you. So I wanted you to talk to us a little bit about your new role as a spousal caregiver.
Yeah, sure, Martha. I'd be glad to. And please feel free to call me Dolores from now on, okay, as we go through our talk. So, yes, it was gradual. My husband has had multiple medical problems for probably the last 10 years, but I didn't become really an official caregiver until about 5 years ago. That's when there were heart issues, very serious heart issues. We thought we would lose him. And that led to a gradual change in our lifestyle. We had been a very active couple, did many things together. We wrote books together, we did research together, and we also did many fun things together. Bike rides and swimming in the ocean and going on walks and things like that would be some of our favorite activities. Well, that changed pretty seriously about 2.5 years ago when he was diagnosed with bladder cancer, which at that time, we had no idea what was ahead. We saw that there were many different pathways that this could go down, depending upon the type of cancer and how he responded to treatment. So that was a significant change because many of the things that we used to be able to do together, we could no longer do. And the caregiving became more real to me because all of a sudden I was providing physical care as well as emotional support and bringing other caregivers into the home, paid caregivers into the home to assist because I was not able to manage all of it by myself. Of course, I thought I could in the beginning, but then I found out that I couldn't. And then about a year ago, he had a significant fall and a hip fracture, and he's been recovering from that. So that led to another layer of complexity because, again, many of the physical things we used to like to do, we couldn't do. We were able to continue writing books. We actually, during the pandemic, of course, this hit during the pandemic as well, to add yet another complexity to it. At any rate, we did get a book finished together along with some other people, and that was very rewarding. So the message is that life changes significantly, and the
Mm-hmm.
role that you take becomes more and more demanding of time and energy and resources.
Well, first of all, congratulations on the book. I know caregiving is very
Mhm.
challenging. I was a caregiver myself. I know Martha was a caregiver herself. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that I wanted to mention, and you mentioned, you're caring for somebody physically and emotionally. And I know from the caregivers that we work with through the Caregiver Resource Centers at Southern Caregiver Resource Center, our caregivers are actually providing higher levels of complex medical and nursing care to their family members
Yeah.
than the national average. So we
Mhm.
have a lot of family caregivers who find themselves now, not in the short term, but in a long term, providing
Mhm.
care that is really nursing home care, could be
Mhm.
nursing home care. It's a real challenge. It's a very big issue and concern for families out there.
And that is why it's so important that everything we say here is about self-care, taking care of yourself, finding what brings you joy, and it doesn't have to be that involved. So I wanted to ask you, Dolores, how are you staying sane throughout this? I mean, you mentioned the pandemic. I think we've gotten so used to living in this mode that it is an added challenge for caregivers. How do you
Mhm.
manage all of that and reduce your stress level?
Yeah, well, first of all, I had never heard of Zoom until the pandemic. And then when the pandemic hit and a lot of the medical care was being given over Zoom, not just personal calls, but medical calls as well. So I had to learn Zoom pretty quickly and get pretty proficient at it. And what do I do to take care of myself? Well, I found that really maintaining a positive attitude is probably the most important thing, because then the behaviors can follow. But the attitude, once you realize that this is part of your marriage, it's part of your love for one another, being able to take care of one another. I know that if the shoe were on the other foot, he would do the same for me as best he could, and quite sure of that. So I feel actually very grateful. I learned a lot about myself during this
Mhm.
caregiving journey. I learned that I didn't have to be busy all the time. I learned that I could slow down, I could take deep breaths, I could learn to
Mhm.
be calm in responding to challenging situations. And that wasn't easy for me because I'm kind of a type A, and I'm going all the time, but I wasn't able to maintain that. And I'm glad that I learned that lesson, that I learned that there is another side to me as a person, and also that I was able to give. I hadn't really been asked to give that much before, as much as I've been asked to give in the last couple of years. And so I found that I was able to feel good about myself in a way that I never could have imagined. I also keep a gratitude journal, and I recommend that for other
Nice.
caregivers. I think it's really helpful to think about what you still have, not everything that's missing. Yeah, we can't do this and that. Okay, you can't. Get used to it. You need to create a new life for yourselves. And so being grateful every day for what we still have, what he can do, what we can do together, and what he can do on his own now that he's recovering somewhat, from some of these illnesses. Some things are a bit more stable at the moment. So we're trying to enjoy the plateau of being stable. We know that there will be new challenges ahead because all of these things go up and down, they never go in a straight line. So that's an important one. Another one that's really important is that I found is forgiveness. So initially, I tended to get very upset and frustrated with my husband for the things that he could not do. I didn't
Which is
appreciate,
normal.
but you kind of feel bad when that happens. It may be
Mhm.
normal. I agree, it is normal, but it strains the relationship, and you don't feel good about yourself, and the other person doesn't feel good when they're at the receiving end. So I've learned about forgiveness. I've learned to take this perspective that many of the issues that he's dealing with, he simply has no control over. This is part of his illness. And as I said, there's multiple illnesses here. So, when one thing's operating, then maybe the other is quiet, but then the other one acts up. And, so you never know from day to day. But you have to really not blame the other person for what they do that maybe is difficult for you to handle or gets on your nerves or, causes you to become unhappy with yourself. You have to forgive. So those would be some things that I think are important lessons, and being open to learning new things about yourself, not doing the same old, but being willing to try new things. So, for example, I joined a support group, an online support group for bladder cancer families and the patients and the families. And then I took a course in mindfulness, deep breathing,
That's
mindfulness,
wonderful.
meditation, that kind of thing. Everything was available on Zoom, so that was easy, and I was able to incorporate it into my schedule. This is not something I would have done in the past.
I am so glad you mentioned that self-awareness piece, right? Knowing your
Mhm.
limitations, knowing maybe how your behavior is changing towards the person you're caring for,
Mhm.
but also being aware of how you can maybe change that perspective. And you mentioned mindfulness, and
Mhm.
I mean, how
Mhm.
better to be aware in self-awareness than through mindfulness. I think that
Yeah.
is the key for us to really relish those little moments, because we can't change the outcome. We can't change what's happening. We can't change the pandemic. We're still here,
Yep.
but we can change those little outcomes, and there are little small goals that will make a difference. Roberto, I don't know if you wanted
Yes.
to add something to that.
I have a big smile on my face right now because Dolores, I know, is renowned researcher and was behind some of the most effective evidence-based programs that are out there for family caregivers, like the REACH program that we run here in San Diego. Dolores helped us develop it here in San Diego back in 2009, which incorporates a lot of the self-care and behavior changes for the caregiver. And when we're doing these from a academic level, it's very different than when you're actually living it and
Mm-hmm.
finding
Absolutely.
your place within your new caregiver role to actually do some of these types of behavioral changes for yourself. The self-care, the forgiveness, the journaling, the
Mhm.
taking courses
Mhm.
online. It's easier to teach that. It's harder to implement that into your own life. And I know that that is a challenge. And sometimes, even as a professional, we look at these things that we know are supposed to be good for us. But then when you're a caregiver, you just don't do it because you're so
Yeah.
overwhelmed. So I smile
Yes.
because I'm so happy, Dolores, that you're implementing these things.
Well, let me say that not at the beginning, not at the beginning. A good friend of mine who had been a caregiver herself for her in-laws, she took me aside and she said, "Look, you've got to practice what you preach.
Mm-hmm.
You've got some good information out there. You've been just sharing it with people for quite a while. Now it's time for you to pay attention and use it for yourself." And believe me, that was a shock because I thought, oh no, I can just go along, I can do my job, I
Mm-hmm.
can, have my friends, I can have my social life, Larry, we'll just hire a caregiver and that'll be fun. And it absolutely was not, it was a wake up call. And I'm very grateful to her that she did that because she really took me aside and said, okay, pay attention now to what's happening to you. Get out of the denial, because I think denial happens in the beginning, a certain amount of that, where you just say, well, it's not really happening, or it's not really that bad, or, we'll make minor adjustments and everything will be kind of the way it was. But it never goes back to the way it was.
I think with what you're saying about denial, it is so true, because I think all of us who have been caregivers or are caregivers right now have this different experience than, like you said, I think I can do it all. I
Mhm.
can just read a book. I
Mhm.
can watch this
Mhm.
video and
Right.
implement what I know and my skills. but it's really different once you're in it. There is this level of, obviously you're related, or you are have an intimate level of a relationship with this person, so you want to fix it, you want to take away the problem, you want it to go away. You talk about how you felt a little resentful with your husband earlier because he wasn't responding the way you wanted him to respond, because we have this different perspective that we expect that person to be living in. And it changes. Caregiving changes. The diseases that in the situation that our loved ones are in changes that perspective. And so to be okay
Mhm.
with, hey, I don't like this, hey, I'm angry, hey, I'm frustrated, hey, I'm in denial, it's okay. It's part of our human experience to say, I might need to step a little bit back and accept that things are
Mhm.
different now.
Mhm. Yes, they certainly are. What I strive to do is to have some type of a balance, between the things that I need to do every day, the things that are important to caregiving, that are absolutely essential, that I do every day for and with my husband, and some things that I do for myself. So I try every day to have that some kind of a balance there. And it can be simple things, like I like drinking coffee, and there are certain kinds of coffee
Me
that I like
too.
better than others. Yeah. So if I might run to Starbucks and get a particular coffee that I like, and that'll be a real uplifting thing for me for that day. I'll feel good that I was able to do that, and it'll help me continue then, with the next set of challenges that are ahead.
You mentioned coffee, and I do love coffee, and I'm not a coffee connoisseur in the sense of knowing which ones are the better ones, but I do enjoy, and I try to be mindful when I drink my coffee,
Yeah.
just
Yes.
smell it, take it in, hold it,
Mhm.
savor it, really
Yes.
indulge it. And it's just a simple cup of coffee, but it's something that brings me joy in the morning, that it's my me time. And that's
Mhm.
something
Yes.
simple that we could all incorporate into our days.
Yeah, and the other thing that my husband and I have gotten to where we can do together now is, now that his hip fracture is healing, he can walk. And we were able to get a nice walker that's comfortable for him, that he can use it and that he feels safe with. And so now we're able to get out and walk every day. Not far, maybe 15 minutes, sometimes half an hour. It's an activity we can do together.
So this has been a really great conversation. Self-awareness, accessing services available, all of those things can really help in a caregiving situation. And there's so much more that we could talk about, but the reality is, for today, is that's all the time we have left for this edition of Let's Talk Caregiving. To hear more of our podcasts, follow us on your favorite podcasting platforms or visit our website at scrc.care. I want to thank Martha for co hosting another important discussion, and our guest, Dr. Dolores Gallagher Thompson, and our audience for tuning in. If you're providing support to a loved one, you don't have to do this alone. Asking for help is not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strength. To connect to our programs and services, visit our website at scrc.care or call us at 1 800 827 1008. If you live outside of San Diego and Imperial counties, visit caregivercalifornia.org to find the Caregiver Resource Center closest to you. And to support our efforts and make a tax deductible donation, please go to scrc.care and click on the Donate tab. Remember, SCRC is here for you,
Caring
caring for
for
those
those
who
who
care
care for
for others.
others.
Thank you.